But we'll go ahead and get started. Hearing will come to order. I want to welcome our panelists today. Look forward to hearing your testimony. Excuse me. The Armed Services Committee panel on business challenges in the defense industry is meeting today to continue our dialogue regarding the health and future of our nation's defense industrial base. And today we specifically look at the unique challenges that small and medium-sized businesses face in trying to do business with the Department of Defense. Members of the panel, as I said, just returned on Friday morning from meeting with businesses in Southern California and Honolulu. And as I've said before, these roundtable discussions have been extremely valuable to the panel, and meetings we had last week provided us with a great deal of insight into many of the challenges that they face in the defense industry. We were honored to have a hearing in Chairman McKeon's district in Santa Clarita, and we also had a meeting in San Diego, Congressman Duncan Hunter and Susan Davis, who both serve on the Armed Services Committee. In addition to the 3 industry roundtables, we also had an opportunity to meet with Admiral Willard, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, and we toured many of the DOD industrial facilities that support our Navy in the Pacific. While we were in Hawaii, one of the small business owners commented that DOD takes the view that small businesses should take a small role. In reality, small businesses are the backbone of this economy, and according to Small Business Administration, small businesses play a leading role as the driver of economic growth and job creation in the national economy, and that more than half of working Americans own or work for a small business, and small businesses are responsible for 2 of every 3 net new private sector jobs created in recent years. We also heard from some of the large companies out there how important small businesses in the defense industrial base, what they make up. There's no doubt that the DoD acquisition community is very risk adverse, and we've got to find ways to meter that risk aversion and reduce the bureaucracy and leverage this critical sector of our economy to meet our national security requirements. We have 3 terrific witnesses today, and they're with us today to explore this topic and assist us in trying to understand this paradigm. We have with us Mr. John Shiraka. What is it? Shiraka. Acting Associate Administrator for Government Contracting Business Development for Small Business Administration. Thank you. This is no Shirley's, but it's a good second place to it. Ms. Linda Hilmer, who's the Chair of the Small Business Division of the NDIA, and Ms. Lynn Schubert, is President of the Surety and Fidelity Association of America. While Ms. Hilmer and her organization are very familiar with HASC, I know that Mr. Shiraka, before it's all over, I'll get it. Perfect. And Ms. Schubert are probably a bit out of their comfort zones. It's not often that someone from the SBA or the world of surety bonding comes to testify before defense committees. However, your experience and insight and recommendations are going to be very important to us, and we're honored you're here with us today. Also, I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Elais and the rest. Elais, did I pronounce that correct? Ellis, and the rest of his team at the Congressional Research Service for their assistance and preparations for today's hearings. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And with that, I was going to turn to Mr. Larson, but he's still probably on another time zone. So what we'll do is, once Mr. Larson, we'll go through your testimony first, and then when Mr. Larson arrives, maybe he'll have some opening remarks to make. So with that, we'll proceed. Mr. Shiraka, if you want to go first, you have 5 minutes, and proceed, please.
Thank you, Chairman Schuster and members of the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. Our top priority at the SBA is to maximize opportunities for small businesses and ensure that the benefits of our programs flow to the intended recipients. My office works each day to get federal contracting dollars into the hands of small and disadvantaged businesses. Contracting with small business is a win-win. Small businesses, who are drivers of the American economy, get the revenue they need to grow and create jobs. Meanwhile, the federal government has the opportunity to work with the most innovative and responsive companies in the country. My office's primary objective is to ensure that eligible small businesses receive their fair share of federal prime and subcontracting dollars. One way we do that is through our oversight of the federal government's efforts to meet the statutory mandated small business goals, which include prime contracting dollars, awarding 23% to small businesses. Over the last 2 years, the Federal Government has made significant improvements in contracting to small businesses. For example, in fiscal year 2010, small businesses won nearly $100 billion, or 22.7% of Federal prime contracting dollars. This marks the second consecutive year of percentage and dollar increase after 3 consecutive years of decline, and was the largest 2-year increase in over a decade. Small businesses also won $74 billion, or 35.4% of subcontracting dollars. Throughout the fiscal year, we at the SBA track and monitor Federal agencies' small business contracting performance closely and publish the annual Small Business Procurement Scorecard. In fiscal year 2010, DOD achieved a grade of B, reaching 95.8% of its small business contracting goals. The Department awarded 20.94% or $61 billion of its Federal contracts to small businesses. The Department awarded $10.4 billion in prime contracts to women-owned small businesses, $20.7 billion to small disadvantaged businesses, $5.3 billion to service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, and $8.7 billion to historically underutilized business zones or hub zones. It also significantly exceeded overall subcontracting goals of 31.7% to small businesses, awarding 37.3%. DOD submitted a fully responsive plan to increase small business contracting within its procurement. The Department was fully receptive to SBA during the reporting period and demonstrated its procurement data was fully and accurately reported. Congress took a major step towards helping small businesses engage in the Federal marketplace with the passage of the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010. Since its enactment, we continue to roll out many benefits to small businesses, specifically the 19 contracting provisions contained in the Jobs Act that will help redirect billions of contracting dollars into the hands of small business. Among changes already enacted include making it harder to bundle contracts, a practice that makes it more difficult for small businesses to compete, holding large prime contractors more accountable to their own subcontracting plans, and strengthening the skills of Federal acquisition workforces by implementing mandatory small business training, revising existing course certifications, and requiring training on small business contracting. While the Jobs Act has made marked improvement to the Federal procurement environment for small businesses, contracting with a large and complex agency like the Department of Defense naturally comes with unique challenges. My office works regularly with all branches of the DOD and their small business communities, conducting outreach and training events and finding new ways to support small businesses and help DOD hit and/or exceed its small business contracting goals. Because of the significant amount of contracts coming from the Department of Defense, my office is in constant contact with the DOD's Office of Small Business Programs and Office of Small Business and Disadvantaged Business Utilization to track and monitor DOD's small business contracting goals. Monthly, the SBA chairs the Small Business Procurement Advisory Council, a meeting where we collaborate with OSDBUs from across the Federal Government to find out how we can best support agencies and address any issues they have with their small business contracting goals. DOD has continued to work to increase small business contracting opportunities for small businesses, demonstrating unprecedented top-level commitment to small business procurement. As an example, in August of 2011, Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta issued a memorandum urging the Department's acquisition workforce to identify opportunities to increase contracting with small businesses. In addition to Secretary Panetta, the Assistant Secretaries of each component of the Department of Defense issued detailed memorandum to their respective acquisition teams and program buyers to encourage the increased use of small businesses. The SBA remains committed to working with Federal agencies to get even more contracts and subcontracts into the hands of small businesses in the coming years. I want to thank you for allowing me to share SBA's views and initiatives with you today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Larson, when they get down to testimony, if you have an opening statement. That's fine. Okay, thanks. Ms. Hilmer?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member Larson, and other distinguished members of the committee. My name is Linda Hilmer, and I am the chair of the Small Business Division of America's leading defense industrial association promoting national security. NDIA has 95,000 members worldwide, more than 1,700 corporate members, and nearly 900 small business division members. In addition to volunteering as the chair of the NDIA Small Business Division, I am a small business owner whose company has supported DOD since 2001. I am also a former federal government contracts professional, which means I'm kind of bilingual. I speak English and I speak federal acquisition. In fiscal year 2010, DOD awarded over $61 billion in prime contracts to small businesses. I'm here today to talk about some of the challenges that small businesses face in doing business with DOD. One of those challenges is bundling. We know why DOD bundles contracts. There was a war on two fronts, increasing budgets and a stretched acquisition staff. Bundling appeared to be a logical answer to meeting the wartime requirements. We're now in a different time, however, and different solutions are required. DOD is very concerned, and rightly so, with avoiding what it calls a hollow force inside the military. I believe the Department ought to also be concerned about a hollow small business industrial base. One of the acquisition approaches bringing about this hollow small business industrial base is the increased use of bundling. Let me give you an example of how bundling hurts small business. Bundling puts small businesses in a dependent, subcontracting role, well hidden from government decision makers. It keeps us at arm's length from the government program managers who set the requirements. It also means that the government contracting leaders who make all the acquisition strategy decisions do not see the small businesses who are performing the work under the primes. But bundling contracts not only hurts small business, it hurts DOD. Bundling means the government pays twice on overhead. It pays for the prime and again for the sub. But more important than dollars, bundling hurts the government by attacking quality. As DOD is awarding more and more IDIQ task orders based on the lowest price, the large primes are putting the squeeze on small businesses. This may mean lower costs for DOD, but at what ultimate cost? Don't get me wrong, lower prices are not bad, but where are the cuts coming from? Are they coming from the prime's profit or from the small businesses? In an effort to stay alive, small businesses will generally cut quality or leave the defense industrial base entirely. Both decisions ultimately result in lower quality products and services in support of the warfighter. Bundling is an acquisition approach, and it's a symptom of a much larger issue at DOD, and that is the perception of small business within the Department. It's an issue that requires the meaningful inclusion of small business in all funded requirements. It needs to be the responsibility of three players: the requirements community, which has the need and the money and forecast requirements; the acquisition community, which commits the funding and sets the acquisition strategy; and the small business directors, who have the responsibility to meet the federal small business goals. Through deliberate organizational approaches and strategic cultural changes, DOD can ensure maximum small business participation, smartly stretching limited budgets to meet our nation's defense and security needs. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And with that, Ms. Schubert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Schuster and the committee for inviting us here to testify on this critical issue. Certainly. The Surety and Fidelity Association is a trade association of more than 450 insurance companies who write surety bonds. They write the vast majority of surety bonds written here in the United States, as well on core projects around the world. We also are a rating agency and licensed by each insurance department across the country. We work closely with federal agencies on surety issues, and particularly well with the Corps of Engineers. One of the many requirements for performing construction projects for the DOD, as well as other federal agencies, is to provide surety bonds to protect the taxpayers and workers, subcontractors, and suppliers on construction projects. For small and medium-sized contractors, this requirement provides both protections and challenges. There's good public policy for the universal requirement of surety bonds on public construction projects. These performance and payment bonds guarantee that the project will be completed and that the subcontractors, suppliers, and laborers on the job will be paid. Contractors on DOD projects over $150,000 must be able to provide these required bonds. If the contractor defaults and the additional funds are needed for completion and to pay the subcontractors and workers, the surety pays the excess costs. There's a direct connection between a contractor's capability and its bondability. There are a number of things DOD can do to increase both that capability and the bondability. If a contractor is bidding for a job that is too large for its business to perform, it will have difficulty in obtaining the surety bonds that were required. Over recent years, the size and dollar value of contracts being let by DOD has increased, and almost by definition, small and medium-sized contractors cannot perform those large contracts. Therefore, many of the contracts from the DOD are just simply too large. Also, as you've already heard, bundling is a tremendous problem with DOD projects. While this may assist in administration of the contract for the DOD, it directly impacts the ability of small and mid-sized contractors to perform the contract and consequently to get the required surety bonds. To address the needs of small businesses, federal procurement rules should contain both mandates and incentives to break construction contracts into smaller parts. First, federal construction contracts need to be subject to the current anti-bundling regulations. Unfortunately, there's a recent case that holds that construction contracts are not even subject to the existing anti-bundling regulations, and that needs to be changed by legislation. SFA also recommends that federal agency letting construction contracts should let 5% of its total budget in contracts of no more than $5 million. Third, the projects that are set aside for small businesses need to be of a size that small businesses can perform. And fourth, the joint venture and mentor protege programs must be allowed to work more effectively. The current federal regulations lack clarity and standardization among the procuring agencies as to what arrangements are acceptable. In addition, the regulations present a disincentive for smaller contractors to participate in federal construction projects with larger contractors as joint ventures or with the mentor protege program. SFAA suggests that small businesses should not lose their status and be disqualified from bidding on small business opportunities because of their participation in these programs or because surety bonds were issued based on the strength of the small contract or the larger contractor joint venture program. The larger contractor's indemnity to the surety for losses under the bond should not threaten the small contractor's status. What happens is you have the partnership, and if a surety is allowed to use the financial status of the larger contractor to begin to develop a relationship with the smaller contractor, ultimately they will develop a surety relationship for that smaller contractor who will be able to bid individually without a joint venture or as part of the protege program. We also urge Congress to look at improvements to the SBA Surety Bond Guarantee Program. We've worked very closely with the SBA over the years on improvements that are necessary and quite recently as well, and I believe legislation will be introduced and we urge you to support that legislation. If you are interested, we work very closely with Department of Transportation and other agencies on programs to assist small emerging contractors in getting surety bonds. We would be more than happy to roll out a program with the DOD for DOD contractors as well. Last, two other points. There is an automatic increase in the Miller Act threshold, which is a threshold below which bonds are not required, that has been put in place, and it has exemptions in there for certain statutes. The Miller Act needs to be added to that exemption, and all of the details on that is in our written testimony. And last, there is a bill pending in Congress, H.R. 3534, called the Security and Bonding Act of 2011, that would ensure that the small and mid-sized contractors who are adversely impacted by fraudulent sureties would no longer have to face that, and I urge you to look at that bill and consider it when it comes to the House. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that, Mr. Larson, if you have an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's had a great CODEL, and appreciate your leadership on that CODEL. And it's good to see several of the members be able to attend all or part of it, and it really provided a good further insight for us out in the field about what our small businesses are facing as part of their contracting with the DOD. I have a statement I'll enter for the record, but just I want to make a few key points. That a key message that's been shared by a lot of the stakeholders that we've met with is the importance of the defense industrial base to our nation's security, and how important that base is to ensuring our women and men in the armed forces have the best weapons, the best services, the best products to do their job. And this defense industrial base is a force multiplier for our military. But as we're even hearing today, and we've heard over this last week as part of the CODEL and in other hearings, this defense industrial base is a force multiplier, but not a monolithic entity. It has many faces to it. It has large multinational corporations, small companies that provide important subsystems and parts to major weapons programs, as well as services. And we're even hearing some of the concerns today expressed that we've heard as part of the trip we just had. But I just want to be sure that we continue to focus the panel on what we feel the key elements hindering small and mid-sized businesses are, and their ability to contract with the DOD, and what steps that we can take to open up opportunities with the Department of Defense. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just enter the rest statement into the record without objection, if that's possible.
Yeah, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And with that, we'll go to questions. I'm going to start off first. Mr. Shiroka, you said that for 3 years running prior to this year, or I guess it would be 2011, where your numbers came from 22.7. Is that from 2011 or 2010?
2010.
Okay. Prior to that, you said for 3 years straight there was a decline in the percent. What was the reason for that? Did it have to do with we were at war and getting contracts out quick or is there some other reason that you feel that was on a decline?
The numbers for 2009 and 2010 showed 2 consecutive years of increases.
Right.
Before that, there was 3 years of declines. I would say that in the last several years, there's been a high priority given from the administration to small business contracting from the President and his advisor, Valerie Jarrett, having quarterly meetings with deputy secretaries from each of the agencies. And I think that has had a significant positive impact on the agencies meeting their goals.
Right. And where were those meetings with, you said?
The quarterly meetings are a White House initiatives with all the deputy secretaries from each of the CFO agencies,
Okay.
the 24 agencies.
Okay. And Ms. Hillman, you said that the government's paying twice if you've from a prime to a sub. Can you sort of explain why you think they're paying twice?
Sure. The prime contractor has the main contract, and they have their own overhead structure and the profit requirements that they need to meet. Small businesses, who are the subs to these primes, we have our own overhead as well. So you're paying, or DOD is paying, for our overhead as well as the prime's overhead, whereas if they came to us directly and contracted, it would be one overhead,
Right.
but it requires more administration on their part.
Right. And you don't feel, I think the idea behind subbing it out is you lower your overhead because you're going out to a subcontractor, but you don't feel that's happening. Their overhead's their overhead. They're subbing it out because it's a way for them to increase their profit. Wow. Is that your?
That is exactly correct.
Okay. And we've seen, as we're moving forward this panel, we see that when the Office of Secretary of Defense focuses on, we look at the MRAPs and some of the other products that had to get out there quickly, do you believe that the Office of Secretary of Defense, that small business programs, is focused enough on working with small businesses? You mentioned there were some here White House initiatives, but at the office, the OSD, is there enough focus on small business? Do you believe each and every one of you can all comment on that if you care to?
If I may
Sure.
first, I think certainly when we talk about the last fiscal year and looking at the continuing resolutions at the end of the fiscal year, some challenges, obviously, that presented some challenges. But there was very close collaboration between our agency as the SBA, along with the Department of Defense, along with our Office of Small Business, as well as their OSDBUs. And I think moving forward, we've identified opportunities to continue where we left off last quarter of last year, and adding additional identification of opportunities. As an example, we talk about our procurement center representatives, which are SBA officials who sit at the most active buying activities that the DOD has. So the procurement center representatives identify opportunities where small businesses should be participating, and if they don't go small business set aside, they can object to that.
And what happens if they object?
They can object, and there's been cases where the contracting officer has turned around and made portion of it small set aside. If the procurement agency does not agree, we can file for an appeal, which raises it up to a higher level.
Ms. Hillmer?
It's been interesting watching the OSD Small Business Office, having been in DOD for quite a few years. You know, that office sat vacant for 2 years, and during that time, it really hurt small business. Now, they've put a director in there, and he has worked very hard and made a lot of progress. He's working very closely with NDIA. They've put a lot of policies in place, yet to see how those policies are going to affect small business per se. But the focus that I've seen at DOD on small business has been more serious than what I've seen in a number of years.
Just in the past couple of years?
Yes.
Okay. Schubert, do you have a comment?
We've not worked directly with that office. We have for a number of other agencies, but not with DOD.
And just so I'm clear on the surety bond, the contracting is just on construction? Or you're not
There are other requirements. There are other federal requirements for surety bonds, for particular service contracts. There are hundreds of them.
Right.
Construction is the one that's most impacted by this.
But building a component for a bigger system, are you required to have a surety bond for that? If one of the small companies is building, an engine for a Humvee, does that require a surety contract or surety bond? No.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But I will get back to you with the answer on that.
Yeah, I don't know, staff, is that a requirement?
Based on the allocation of the subcontractor contract, there are payment sureties that have to be signed.
Okay. All right, with that, yield to Mr. Larson for questions.
First, from Ms. Schubert, can you just explain again to me on the mentor protege program, does the protege, for the sake of definition, become subsumed in the definition of a larger contractor, and therefore they kind of lose their ability to get a surety bond? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. And one of the major problems is that it's handled differently throughout the various agencies. There's no one way that it's acceptable or unacceptable. And what we would love to see is one standard that this is what's acceptable. Not only do they get subsumed, but even if they don't, if the surety looks to the larger contractor for the bond, then there's it
applies to their to the protege.
Exactly.
Only in the DOD, or
no, it's a problem throughout all the federal agencies.
Okay, and then how would you specifically fix that?
Well, we would suggest that it not make the smaller contractor lose out on its small contractor status. What happens is they lose out on their status, and then they're no longer can qualify for the set-aside program. Yeah.
To do your bonding, do you need to have a certain? Does the contractor need to have a certain size contract? Do surety?
In the federal government, the size contract where bonding is required is $150,000 and above. In states, some of them are $50,000. Local municipalities, some of them are $10,000, $20,000.
So those are relatively small.
It is
relatively.
It is. No, it's definitely relatively small.
Yeah.
And what happens is you've got contractors who are starting to get bonding at $100,000 or $150,000, and then the project they want to bid on is a $5 million project, and they don't have the capability to perform the project, and now they need a surety bond, and therefore they can't get that bond.
Yeah. Are these largely construction?
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's plenty of that.
Yeah.
DOD.
And we always want more.
Yes. So
And
do
if we ever get a transportation bill, we will. We will have more. Ms. Helmer, on your testimony on page 3, and in your written testimony on page 3, and your oral testimony, you talked about the longer-term cultural and organizational shift necessary. How can that happen, and how can we write that into legislation? Give me something to grab onto here.
I love it. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
It really needs to start from the top, as with any cultural change. If there's any way that Congress can put teeth to the small business goals, that would be a huge step in the right direction. Right now, if DOD or any agency doesn't meet its small business goals, they get hauled before Congress and get their wrists slapped. But there's no price to pay, literally. So if there were some teeth to those goals, that would help. Just having the secretaries of the services understand the importance of the small business industrial base and embrace that and push that down through their services, I think would make a huge difference. The program managers themselves, the requirers, have to understand the importance of small business and the role that small business plays. I believe you mentioned before that the DOD culture is risk adverse.
Right.
Nobody gets fired for hiring IBM, right? But for a small business, there's some risk there. And so they're not as embracing of small business as they could be. And if the requirements community were perhaps held accountable for including small business, they might be a little bit more open to doing that.
Yeah. One of the issues I heard about last week, and we may have heard about it before, and it may have been stated a different way, had to do with, and I want to see if I get this right, and the staff could help me remember this correctly. It's a difference between being allowed to compete and then actually being qualified to compete or qualified to do the job. Is that, you're nodding your head for the record as if you understand what I'm talking about. So maybe you could help me out with the problem and what you think the solution is.
I do understand the problem. And that's actually something that the OSD, Office of Small Business, has been looking into in their market research surveys, to their credit. When a commercial company wants to do business with a small business, they do a lot of research on that small business, right. And they make sure that they're not only qualified, they're viable, they're able to perform. And that's the type of information that's missing from the market research that's available to PMs and small business specialists and contracting officers right now.
Oh, okay. All right. Is it Shiraka? Mr. Shiraka?
That's correct.
Can you discuss briefly your view about the teeth or lack of teeth in enforcing the small business goal, the goal of achieving the small business contracting goals? Sure.
I think there's several, I guess, different layers of that. As mentioned earlier, there's a emphasis on small business goals from the White House on down. The administration, through Valerie Jarrett, has made it very clear to each agency that the goals are very important to meet. Our agency, Karen Mills, holds regular conversations with each of the agencies to make sure that the goals are met. Our deputy administrator, beginning as soon as the goals were released this year, has held calls with each of the deputy secretaries emphasizing, one, what the importance of the goals, but also what are the tools to meeting those goals. So there's, as I mentioned, the Small Business Jobs Act gave us some additional tools. So what are the tools under there? Like we talk about the bundling and the restrictions on bundling now. We talk about indefinite quantity contracts and how those can now be set aside. So what are the tools? Another thing that I would point out is that from the White House initiative, all SESs that have in their program procurement activity are now under their performance metrics graded on small business, understanding of small business and meeting the small business goals. So that's the one thing we've worked with agencies to make sure that the program officers are now also aware of and are rated on the goals. So
are they rated individually, or are they rated as an agency, and then their
with regards to
their budget requests get reflected reflect the achievement?
With regards to the goals for the agency, obviously it's rated as an agency, but supervisors then that are doing reviews on SESs, as an example, can rate them individually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, Mr. Schilling is recognized. Questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome. Happy New Year. It's good to be back. I'd like to start out with Mr. Shureka. I'm going to be here soon, going to be introducing a small business bill that will address the mentor-protege programs. Its main goal is to allow the SBA to either create a new program for qualifying small business or to participate to open up a current program for them. Anyway, it would also streamline, and I think that's one of the things that we're getting at. And I got to say, I am very impressed with what's going on here. I mean, I think we're really getting a good grip here. I'm a small business owner. I kind of jump ahead of myself all the time, but it'll streamline and make the process easier for small businesses to participate by setting standard regulations for each department. Specifically, it will put SBA in charge of overseeing and setting standard rules, and the department would implement regulations for all of the programs. This bill would also require SBA to present data to the Congress about the progress of the programs with regard to how successful proteges are in general and in the terms of obtaining and retaining federal contracts. Currently, 13 departments sponsor programs which differ in eligibility and incentives to participate, but each program exists to pair new businesses with businesses that are more experienced with federal contracting. However, success among departments varies widely. Do you think something like this would help the small businesses, and then in what ways, maybe?
I think we hear about the mentor-protege program at the Department of Defense oftentimes, and we're often hear that is one way of engaging mentors along with the proteges and bringing them on board either as a subcontractor or in a prime contract relationship. And that has been very successful. Different agencies have different models, certainly. At the SBA, our mentor-protege program, as it stands, focuses on our 8A portfolio, our 8A portfolio being disadvantaged firms. This provides opportunity for a protege to team up with a mentor and submit for a joint venture application. Under that joint venture application, that entity now is considered an 8A, so they can actually pursue, even though they're joined together now, a set-aside project. This is an incentive, I think, for the large business because now they can pursue small businesses, but it's an incentive for the small business because now they can be mentored and pursue larger projects. I think there's different models that work at different agencies in certain respects, and they've been modeled after what works at their own agency. I know the Small Business Jobs Act provided or allowed for the SBA to roll out the mentor-protege program to our other set-aside programs, and that's something that we are working on currently.
Very good. My next question will go to Mrs. Hilmer. DOD has been used as an example of successful mentor-protege programs, which is basically why my bill gives them the option to remain separate if they want to in the program. Can you speak on your experiences with the DOD's mentor-protege programs and why they're so successful?
I have no personal experience with it. However, I do know other small businesses that do participate, and it's true. DOD has a very good mentor-protege program in place. It's well structured, and it's implemented well. So I think it would serve as a very good example, and I've known several small businesses that have found it to be very useful, and it has helped them.
Very good. One of the questions, I'm going to kind of bump around here, but Mrs. Schubert, in reference to the unbundling, can you give, I mean, we've got some ideas as to, why we should unbundle, but maybe why, what would be some of the adverse things, some of the bad, or some of the reasons why we shouldn't unbundle? Are there any reasons why not to unbundle, I guess?
Well, what we hear from the federal government is the ease of administration. They want to see one contract, one place, one sense of responsibility, and unfortunately that eliminates vast numbers of small businesses when you do that, and it also does double bill overhead. There's no question about that. Unbundling would make a lot more small businesses eligible for surety bonding, which would allow them to then participate as general contractors and not just subcontractors on the jobs.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I recognize Ms. Hanabusa for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Is it Hilmer? I understand the theory behind why we shouldn't bundle, and I agree with you. However, if it's not one company that's doing it and bundling, then who takes that role? In other words, say you have one project, you've got to have these different components, and now we have it bundled. Does it then mean we increase the government acquisition staff so they then become responsible where before we kind of pushed it onto the prime?
I've been with DOD a while now, so I'm watching this come full circle. It used to be where DOD did have program integration, and those program integrators were responsible for, yes, hiring scores of contractors to do various types of work under the bigger programs. So yes, it does result in more work for the Department of Defense, quote unquote. But I just think that the importance of maintaining a strong industrial base and the small businesses in that industrial base outweighs that.
So that would be the cost that would have to be paid if we decide that small business is the priority, and we've decided that, but to implement it, and as to put our money where our mouth is, we would need to then realize that maybe the intended consequence of that action is going to be that we're going to have to increase the acquisition force within DOD so that they would now be overseeing the contracts in a different manner.
The short answer is yes. DOD has been increasing its acquisition workforce, as you know. So I say,
but they're still bundling.
They're still bundling.
So we just need them to refocus.
Right. It takes a while to turn the ship around.
Thank you. Ms. Schubert, I understand a lot about surety bonds. And the interesting part about surety bonds in the construction context is that it really has been the mechanism by which we have kept smaller contractors out of large construction projects because they just can't bond it. I think one of the issues that people do not realize is small businesses, when they actually go out for these bonds, really put a lot of their personal assets on the line because that bond has got to be backed by someone's assets. And if you're a big corporation, you have assets, but usually a small business is an individual. So that's why for many of them, they not only do not have the capabilities of getting the bonds, but they also may not want to put their home, for example, on the line. So having said that, as the consequence of that, is there an alternative for that surety requirement to keep the small business contractor being able to bid and to be competitive? Because for a lot of them, one bad project could wipe them out forever.
Well, that's actually our concern. One bad project could wipe a subcontractor out forever as well. So if you don't have the performance and the payment bonds in place, then the other people, the other small businesses are definitely impacted because that protection is not there. In fact, there's some excellent testimony from a number of years ago by subcontractors who said they just would not participate on federal contracts any longer until the size of the payment bond was made equal with the size of the performance bond. So you have both sides of the story. We represent sureties who write a tremendous number of bonds for small contractors. And we actually have some statistics that I'd be happy to provide for you at a later date in writing about the number of small contractors that have bonding. It is extraordinarily rare that a surety company is interested in taking somebody's house as collateral, just particularly in this economy, but even in previous economies, it just isn't something that a surety wants to do. They have to have the capital, but more importantly, they have to have the capacity to do the work. And if you look at, I mean, what Ms. Hilmer was talking about is analyzing the capability and the qualifications of the contractor. That's what a surety bond does. That's what the surety does, is they evaluate the contractors to make sure that they can do the work. We have a number of excellent programs that actually help small contractors get their first bond.
So you're acting like a pre-qualifier for the government as well, is what you're saying, by having that contract.
And that's why the requirement was put in place in the first place, was contractors not perform.
But most of the big contracts, like for example in Hawaii, they have to be able to bond a 50-year project. And
50-year project?
50. That's the way military construction works in Hawaii. The housing is built on a 50-year project. So there are very few companies who are able to bond a 50-year housing project.
That is correct. I would recommend that you change the requirement because you're not going to get contractors to bond.
Congress did it well. I wasn't here, but they did it well, and they are people who qualified for that. Thank you.
Your direct answer to your question is there are alternatives. You're allowed to post letters of credit. You're allowed to post assets, and those assets have to be pledged to the federal government, and they are put in a federally insured financial institution. It is much more difficult to do that for a contractor than it is to get a surety bond. That's why we like working through the mentor-protege programs and joint ventures to try and assist those contractors.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Runyon is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Hilmer, as we go through this and talking, obviously, you say the double charge on bundling, and we get that because it's a redundant overhead on both sides. But with your experience with acquisitions and contracting officers, we've been through many of these hearings a lot of time, and you mentioned it too, that there's no history, no research, and they're afraid to take that step and give them that contract. Therefore, a lot of the subs actually have to go through the primes to even get their foot in the door. And a lot of times, and we experience this out in California, a lot of times the subs will just get bought up by the primes, and their intellectual property and everything will just disappear, and it's not getting to the DOD. How do we deal with the lack of background and the lack of the acquisition or the contracting officer being out there and being exposed also? There's got to be a way we can help that process.
That's a very good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. I mean, I've been wrapping my brain around it. The division has been wrapping their brains around it. We're trying to come up with the answer to that. Part of it is about market research. Right now, DOD, none of the military services have really sufficient market research tools. How to get the small businesses how to get DOD to take that chance on a small business, that's part of the SBIR program, too, SBIR, which, by the way, thank you very much for reauthorizing that. It has made a huge difference to our members, and we're really appreciative. So SBIR is a good way to get some of the new technology into DOD. How to get new services and approaches and get DOD program managers to take that chance. Maybe it's part of the culture and rewarding them for taking chances and bringing in small business and creating a different kind of incentive program. You know, those are all things we've been thinking about. There's no clear-cut answer. It's a tough one. It's a tough nut to crack.
I agree. I mean, and you hear it at every field hearing we have, and it's a frustrating aspect, and it's a big reason why this panel was put together.
And I can tell you, with the bundling issue and IDIQs, the increasing use of IDIQs, you're not getting those small businesses involved who haven't had past performance with DOD. None of those companies are invited to the table. So you're missing out on an entire possible industrial base there.
Which companies are not invited, did you say?
Small businesses who don't have any experience in doing business with DOD, because the primes who are going after these large IDIQs, the small businesses they want on their teams, just like everybody, is they want them to have experience and past performance that they can use to win the work. And if you don't have past performance with DOD, you don't get invited to the party.
Thanks. I yield back, Chairman.
Ms. Sutton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was sorry I had to miss the field hearings. I know that they were tremendously informative, and I'm looking forward to gathering
Well,
the
if you
notes.
would yield for 1 second.
Certainly.
We brought up, one of the topics, I think we brought up a number of times, the topics we learned about corrosion, and in fact, we brought it up to the chairman, and he looked at us and said, how much? So
I know. I'm telling you, I'm so proud. Thank you so much for doing that. There's a lot of money to be saved and progress to be made by mitigating, preventing corrosion. But I digress. This has been very informative as well, and I appreciate it. And I just want to clarify, Ms. Hilmer, I think that you said a few moments ago that you notice that the focus on small business in the past couple of years has been better, has been notably better. Is that correct?
Within DOD,
Within
since
DOD.
they have the new director, there is a focus, and they've actually elevated him directly to reporting to the AT&L.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. That's always the kind of news we want to know. If you guys, there were some things that were discussed already that I'd just like a little more clarification. Ms. Hilmer, let me ask you, on page 3 of your testimony, you talk about how the whole the IDIQ contracts based on lowest price, the large primes are putting the squeeze on their smaller subcontractors. I'd just like to explore that a little bit more. You talk about how that may reduce the quality or leave the defense market, they may leave the defense market space entirely. But could you just give me, without naming names, some sort of example of how quality might be at risk, and anything else you want to talk about along these lines?
Actually, I'd like to give you a personal example of my own company, if I could.
Certainly.
We spent $8,000 to participate in a proposal, an IDIQ proposal, and the large prime won, and as soon as they won, the first thing they did was come back to us and say, we need to slash your rates. My company prides itself on the quality of the products and services that we provide to DOD. It's very different than some of the large contractors. We're very focused on what we do and very much personally involved and very creative. Doing low-quality work doesn't interest us, and quite frankly, I think it hurts the Department of Defense.
Sure.
And in order for us to continue with that contract, we would have had to cut our salaries, cut everything, and hire people who are not as creative and talented as the people that we have. And so we simply removed ourselves from the contract. Mm-hmm. So we will not be participating in providing our services under that contract to the Air Force.
I appreciate that. Does anyone else have a comment on that? Oh, okay. Sir, you were talking about the ratings when goals aren't met, and you were, Ms. Hilmer, you were also talking about the need to change this. It starts at the top, and the need to sort of implement effective, measures to make sure that those goals are met. Can you tell me how the ratings translate? I guess part into being an incentive or a disincentive for certain behavior. So if a goal isn't met, what's the result? What happens?
Well, first of all, I should say that since there is emphasis on this from from the White House down, there is a huge incentive, I think, for the agencies to meet the goals. But having said that, the scorecards are published. If the goal is not met, their grade reflects that. However, the agency is also required to develop a plan which we negotiate and which we agree to on how they will meet their goals moving forward. In other words, we didn't meet our goals last year. This is why, and this is how we're going to meet them next year. And that plan is developed in consultation with us. One point that I would add with regards to the subcontracting, I just wanted to add that under the Small Business Jobs Act, it does provide for additional provisions for prime contractors to meet their subcontracting goals. So there's more teeth for prime contractors to meet their own subcontracting goals that they present in their proposals.
Would you like to add anything, Ms. Hilmer?
I think your question was, what are the ramifications if they
Right.
don't meet? And what I'm hearing is that the ramifications are you have to report back and come back with a plan. I think that money talks. And if you affect a budget, they'll feel it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That Mr. West is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Ranking Member. Thanks for the panel for being here. You know, one of the important things you brought up was the invite to the table. I did, 22 years with a fun organization called the Army. You know, when you go to the Association United States Army trade show, if you want to call it that, one of the things I think that we need to focus on, you don't see a lot of the small businesses there. You know, do we have something, or can we start something like this AUSA that you see up here in Washington, D.C. or down in Fort Lauderdale that can go around regionally, and we can start, instead of focusing on the big contractors, can we focus on, small businesses, and we can highlight them, and especially some small businesses that don't have the experience so they can get that invite to the table. Is that something that we're looking at doing with some of these trade organizations?
Thank you. If I just may add that with regards to sort of matchmaking events, et cetera, we are working with the Department of Defense to ensure that we increase matchmaking events. As has been mentioned, they have a new Office of Small Business Programs Director. I should also mention that the administration has asked that senior level officials, Senate confirmed officials, participate in at least 2 small business matchmaking events from each agency. So that should increase the opportunities for small businesses to participate. And I think that level of commitment from the agency would encourage small businesses, would encourage program buyers at the agency to be present, but it would encourage small businesses to participate as well.
Well, the AUSA Winter Symposium is coming up for Fort Lauderdale, which happens to be our district. Is there any kind of way that we can say to AUSA, you need to earmark out, X amount of space on that floor for some of these local small businesses that do DOD type of contracts? I can name about 10 off the top of my head. But is that something that we can go to them and, try to get them to do?
I wouldn't know the answer to that right off the top of my bat, but right off the top of my head, but I can certainly work on that when I get back to the office and get an answer to you.
Ms. Hilmer, any?
Well, I can speak from NDIA's perspective. Actually, what we're doing this year, because NDIA has an annual small business conference, we're actually making it more regionalized. So we do attract the regional small businesses. Speaking from a small business point of view, the reason you don't see those small businesses at these bigger events is because of the cost. Mm-hmm. When I first started my business, I spent a lot of money attending a lot of events, a lot of matchmaking, things like that. Didn't result in any business. So I think what we have to do, and to the Department's credit, Department of Defense, they're actually looking at this as well. How do you make these events a return on investment for small businesses who participate? How do you measure that? And quite frankly, just ask them, did you get any business out of this? A year later, 2 years later, things like that. Regarding your specific question, can you ask an association to set aside some space or some time for small businesses? I say try it. Let's see what happens.
Okey-doke. You guys will try that, and I'll try it on my end. The other question I have, real quickly, a good friend of mine, Colonel Pete Newell, started a great organization with the Army called the Rapid Force Initiative, where they go over into these combat theaters of operation. They find out immediately the type of things that the men and women on the ground need, and they come back and they go looking for small businesses that can provide those type of goods and services right off the shelf. What are we doing to try to use that type of small business innovation to cut down on this procurement and acquisition process that we have that, can go from, now till ad infinitum, ad nauseum. So is there something we could do with that to take what Colonel Newell has with the Army and extend that out for the other branches of service, or maybe make that a DOD type of, agency?
If I can answer, with regards to the SBA, we have several cluster initiatives where we have some of them focused on the Department of Defense, which provides incentives for identifying opportunities, as you've mentioned. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the SBIR and STTR initiatives, and with the 6-year extension that provides a level of comfort for small businesses and certainty, I think that encourages them to participate in the program. And I would say that with the increase in the grants, that should also encourage them to participate in the program.
I believe DOD has something called a Rapid Innovation Fund, where they're specifically targeting some small businesses and helping them get through. They have really neat products and services, and helping them get through the procurement process without having to jump through all the hoops. But I like your idea very much, and I think we should try to do it.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Thank you. As talked a little bit about here, I said in my opening statement, and a couple other members mentioned about the Department of Defense, the program managers are being risk averse. Something was said, put some teeth into the mandates. I always get a little concerned when we're forcing things down. Sometimes you force bad decisions, and I think somebody was talking a little bit about how do you reward taking those risks. And in Washington, D.C., everybody's concerned about taking a risk because the Washington Post or the Los Angeles Times or one of these newspapers pile on and say how terrible it was that this program manager or this member of Congress or this company took a risk and tried to do something, and obviously it didn't succeed. So as I'm going through this process, and I just sort of throw this idea out there, we've heard about, today we talked a lot about not enough market research out there. How do the DOD they want to deal with somebody they've got experience with because they have experience and they know they can perform something. We've heard a lot about the DCAA and their auditing and how difficult that is. And so as I'm thinking about this and trying to think a little bit outside the box, is it possible there are industries in America that self-regulate. The financial services industry, FINRA is a self-regulator, CPAs, even, God forbid, the lawyers, I think, self-regulate to a certain degree. Is it possible to have an organization that's funded by industry that, for one thing, maybe certifies a company? Because a lot of the work, when you go in Hawaii, we went into, and in the Arsenal and other places we've gone into, where a lot of the work they do, they're machine shops, and you're machining things. But industry all across America, not the Department of Defense, they get things machined and built all the time that isn't specialized to the Department of Defense. And sometimes we try to make it that it's got to be machined exactly this way or it's not going to fit. Well, if you're manufacturing any kind of high-performance vehicle or item, it's got to be machined properly. So is it possible, in your minds, to set up an organization that maybe certifies companies and says, yeah, this company can machine or this company can manufacture this? Is it possible in that organization to sort of self-regulate and go in and do the audits on smaller businesses? And of course, you still have, for instance, FINRA has the SEC over top of it. And when FINRA goes in, the SEC sometimes comes in behind and says, no, not good enough, or you need to change. And I think we do two things. I'm saying this, and across the street, people hear me saying this, we're going to eliminate a lot of DCAA employees, but push them out into the private sector, let them self-regulate. I believe they're going to have a better understanding of small businesses, and they're, again, funded by, but FINRA's been working for 70 years very well as some of these other agencies. So when you talk about changing the culture over there, when you talk about how do we look at this differently, does that, when I say this thing to you that I'm not fully created in my mind, but is it completely out of the box, it's too crazy, or is that something, is that something that you see as potentially workable?
It's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about self-regulation. The biggest negative I could see to that would be competition. Once you start regulating, giving the seal of approval, then those companies that don't have that or don't know how to get it or can't afford it, because there will be a price associated with it, then you kind of maybe knock them out of the
But we're doing that already, aren't we? If you don't know how to get into DOD, and this is, when I look at the FINRA model, I keep coming back to that. The industry, you want to be a financial broker in this country, you got to go through the process and get certified by FINRA, and then you can sell the various products. We're the same thing in especially, I'm not concerned about the Boeings and the Lockheeds of the world. They got it figured out, but it's very difficult and I've got small businesses coming to me in my district all the time. How do I get business with DOD? And they think there's some magic, but it's, get in there and pound away and go through the process, and it may take 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to get business. So
the only comment that I would make is that, my concern would be an additional layer of work for the small business. I mean, we hear about small businesses and getting on a schedule, or small businesses and getting, into the 8A program as an example. Another layer of certification, I would maybe be concerned about that, or costs associated thereof. Another thing, just with my perspective, I come out of the small business government contracting world myself before I was appointed to the SBA. And I know, as a small business that was a government contractor, I know that the DCAA oftentimes gets thrown under the bus, but they are for, this is the perspective of the SBA, they are, stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And I do know that the DCAA has certain restrictions that don't necessarily always apply to small businesses under contracts, from contract to contract provisions. But as stewards of the taxpayer dollars, they are sort of tasked with doing that work. But again, with the comment with regards to a certification process, that's the only thing I think that I would add.
Right. Schubert. And with that, I believe Ms. Hanabusa has further questions.
I just had a follow-up from Ms. Schubert. Ms. Schubert, what's is there like a percentage that is the cost of a surety bond on a project?
There is. It's a premium on a surety bond is somewhere about 1% of the contract price or below.
So according to your testimony, you were taking issue with the fact that the council went from 100,000 to 150,000, and you felt that it was going to leave unprotected any sub that was doing work, I guess, on a $150,000 contract. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So if that would be a sub to a contractor who has a $150,000 contract.
Correct.
So what if we were to go to a situation where we unbundled and they all became general contractors, then wouldn't a lot of the smaller guys also have to come up, if they were all about $150,000, that they would then all have to come with their own surety bond and payment bonds attached to them, versus a general contractor who we assume would have that? Though I do know some generals who actually require certain large subs to carry subcontracting bonds as well. And the ones I was referring to are really the smaller subcontractors who, under the terms of their contract with the general, have to also carry surety and payment bond requirements. But if we were to, quote, unbundle it, wouldn't we result with more surety bonds out there, too?
There wouldn't be more surety bonds. You would just have different contractors who had the contracts up to the 150. You're talking
Right.
about $150,000.
But if it were in this normal structure, you probably would have one large contractor who would have a surety bond, and the subs probably, depending on how their general felt, may or may not be required to carry the bonds, correct?
Right. And you could end up actually, as backwards as it sounds, you could end up with more surety bond requirements that way. The bond requirement covers the entire contract price. Right. So say you have a $500,000, to make something easy, $1 million contract. You have one surety bond and it's based on $1 million. You divide it up into $150,000 contracts. You would still have the same overall value of surety bonds out there. It's just they would be provided by smaller contractors from different people, yeah.
Do you know what the percentage rate on the call on those bonds are from your industry standpoint? On military construction, for example, what's the failure rate that we're looking at that has called upon the bonds?
I can provide those statistics for you. That's one of the things our organization does. And one of the things to keep in mind is there are 2 points to the bond. One is the pre-qualification, as you described it very accurately. And then the second is to pay if, in fact, the surety's wrong with their pre-qualification. They then turn around and pay. So I can provide the loss ratios for you.
Yes.
And the premium volume. And the way it's divided up is federal versus non-federal. I don't believe that we have statistics specifically on military, but I can get you as much detail as we have.
Do you by any chance have statistics? This has been a curious thing for me. When they were in Hawaii, they got to see our example of corrosion, which was the stadium. And having been part of that litigation, I can tell you the litigation costs on many of it, I had a surety company, on the surety issues far exceeded the actual original construction costs. So do you have statistics that when we start to do all of this, at what point is it, did everything associated with the bond exceed the actual benefit that we received? In other words, did government ever have to step in, finish the project anyway? Do you have any statistics like that?
No, we have plenty of cases, I'm sure, going both ways on that, and I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you about that.
Sure, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Could I also just, one suggestion that might address not these questions, but the earlier question? The SBA Surety Bond Guarantee Program is a very useful tool for small contractors to get the bonds. So we work very closely with SBA on that, and if you'd like, we could also sit down with you about the changes that are necessary so we can help increase the number of contractors who can get the benefit of the bond guarantee program.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Hanabusa, and thank you for hosting us out there in Hawaii. And also, Ms. Sutton, we also saw examples of corrosion in Palmdale with some of our Air Force fighters, and they're telling us that coming in from Hawaii, from Hickman Air Force Base, F-22s are going to come in, and because of the climate there, as well as some other places in the country, the corrosion's a huge problem. So you were on our mind. So, no, I think of solving problems, and that's a big problem to solve.
No, we don't have problems like that in the Northwest at all. So, anybody wants to send their stuff there, it's fine.
The good news is we can do something about
Yeah, absolutely.
and we can lead
Yeah.
in that, and we can do it in the United States.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. Appreciate you taking the time and providing us with your insights. And again, we're going to continue to do our work here. We're charged with coming up with some concrete language for legislation to help improve the environment for the folks that work in the defense industrial base. And it's my thought that we're set up for 6 months. It's my thought this is going to take more than 6 months to really get at the core, because when we talk about things like changing the culture and how do you get people to not be risk adverse, it's a difficult challenge, but it's something I think we're going to need to do, especially facing the kind of budget constraints we're going to have for the foreseeable future, and also the need to continue to come up with new and better ways to defend our country, to give our warfighters the tools they need to keep America safe and secure. So again, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your time. And the hearing is adjourned. Do I need to do anything official? Hearing is adjourned.